you.
Thanks, everybody.
So now...
It's your turn.
It's your turn. So that's the end of our sort of standard walkabout segment. And now we're happy to do some Q&A.
So, Miss Addie Dove.
Yes.
What is it that is sitting on a Blue Origin rocket right now?
Yes. So other than Dave and one of the pins from the space track. So I have... Yeah, do I have a... Yes, so I have an experiment. We've had a number of experiments fly with Blue Origin on their New Shepard vehicle, which is a suborbital rocket or a suborbital vehicle. So it's a rocket that launches a little capsule. And sometimes they've been, actually a lot recently, more often than they've been flying payloads, they've been flying humans. I'm not bitter about that, it's fine. But so they also fly a lot of really cool science payloads. And so sometimes they load it up with sort of lockers of science and technology investigations. Actually some really cool like art investigations in microgravity that have been done. But so my experiment is looking at charging dust and how it behaves then in low gravity. So we use these suborbital rockets to get about 3 minutes of microgravity, and we can see how charged regolith small 200 micron dust particles, once they're charged, how they move around in a low gravity environment. And so we're doing this to also test some sensors that we're going to eventually hopefully also send on another lunar mission to study how dust on the surface behaves on the moon. But most importantly for this context is that I also have a stuffed citronaut. He's Citronaut Dave. You can follow him on Instagram and Twitter and see his adventures. He'll post some pictures from the Blue Origin rocket soon. Actually, he was out at Artemis yesterday taking some pictures too. But he's a little stuffed mascot that has pins that he often wears, and we got a space track pin last year, and he's going to wear it to space whenever it goes. It was supposed to go this week, and I was hoping to be able to bring it back, but then it didn't launch because it was the week of Scrubs. Yes. Maybe in a couple weeks though. Yeah.
I was going to play a video from one of our previous
come on up to the mic if you have questions. Hello.
Hi, I'm Sean.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. So I was wondering, so I know one of the big challenges and then part of the reason they are so interested in the moon is a refueling station sort of as a launch point. Mm-hmm. Has there been any discussion of how perhaps to get that fuel, maybe take it and like catapult it up and catch it in orbit rather than bring vehicles down to the moon, which would put them back in the gravity well? Like,
So, are you talking about
like if we harvest stuff on the moon, how do we get it up
like mine
into orbit?
Yeah.
Throw it up to orbit, catch it from some station up there, and then load it off to vehicles.
Yeah, I mean most. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the one of the absolute benefits for those who don't know much about like gravity wells, some of you may do, but so launching anything from Earth takes a lot of energy. That's why we have a 100-meter tall rocket ready to launch to the moon. But to get
You're
off
in America, how many feet is
sorry,
that?
A few. I have no idea. 300 something feet. But to get off the surface of the moon, we can just use a tiny. Like the lunar module was able to launch itself off the surface of the moon. So that's because there is far less gravity, so you can have much smaller rockets. So if we can produce our rocket propellant on the surface of the moon, it will be ultimately far less energy intensive to then launch that into orbit to utilize that in space as a sort of pit stop.
Yeah, I mean, most of this is going to be probably processed on the lunar surface and then encapsulated somehow. And so that would need to be launched into orbit somehow. I guess we could, if we found like big deposits and chunks of rock, and then we eventually like were able to sort of mine them on the lunar surface and launch those chunks up and process them on orbit. That might be a different way to sort of like eject it up into orbit. But it'll probably be sort of like capsules that go and come back kind of thing.
And at 4 o'clock this afternoon, the two of you will be going into a lot more detail about how to take advantage of the resources that you find
on the moon, asteroids, in situ resource utilization talk.
Yeah, right here at 4 o'clock. Yeah.
Does that answer most of your questions?
Yes, cool. Thank you.
Feel free to ask another one. There's nobody else in line behind you.
I put up a video from one of our previous flights on the Blue Origin rocket. So this is real time. It's not slow motion. That marble is about the size of a marble. And it smacked into a pile of special space dirt at the speed that you saw it smacking into it there.
Yeah.
And you can't do those kinds of things on a tabletop at 1G, because you can't actually drop something from close enough to the surface for it to move that slowly when it hits the surface, and then it won't do anything. It just sits there.
And one of the other things you see happening in this video right now is those little specks, or these dust grains that are floating around and clumping. And so I think Rain asked the other day about like the Don Pettit Saturday morning science experiment he did up on the ISS, where you look at clumping of material. Part of that happens is because of charges and little electrostatic surface interactions on dust grains. And so we charge our dust grains in my experiment, and then we see how they behave in an electric field and how they clump and things like that.
Hi, how's it going?
Great.
I've been waiting for a little bit now to get more into to space news, and I was just wondering what a really good source is for all things space-related news.
Well, you should start with Walkabout the Galaxy.
Yeah, of course. I'll
It's a
definitely
fun
be checking that
astronomy
out.
podcast. We usually have space news segments at the beginning. We do
Right.
science news also. So it depends on if you're interested in sort of like the science, more of the science space side, or sort of the rocket space side, right? There's a few different types of sources for that.
I like to. I mean, I will literally, before we ever record it, we just Google space news or planetary news and see anything interesting that comes up. But the important thing I find is I want to find articles that link to a paper, because there's one thing to have. Often these headlines and whatever, it might be really exaggerating. You need to see what is actually true and what is, have they interpreted this information correctly? Because we have to be responsible in the information that we share.
For us, that's true. But if you're not a scientist with the background to interpret those articles,
That's
Well,
true.
you maybe don't want to read those papers,
Yeah.
but the fact that those papers are there
linked
saying
to.
that it's based on
Yeah.
peer-reviewed research. So space.com is actually a really handy resource, and they're sort of broken down by like rocket news versus astronomy news versus space exploration news, and then they will have the links to the source articles there. So they have a number of reporters that do a good job.
like Science Alert does a pretty good job of sort of topical news things. If you want to know like everything about space flight and those happenings and get way too many text or like Twitter alerts on your phone, you can follow Spaceflight Now. They do like up to the date. This is launching, and then during launches, all of the up to date stuff.
Yeah.
Physics.org is really good, and that's more on. There's a lot more physics than just the science side.
High energy physics, and we go there for we're talking about cosmology, because that's where
Large
the space
Hadron
side of
Collider
stuff
updates.
leaks into and overlaps with astronomy and stuff like that. And then on the human spaceflight side, in particular with going back to the moon and eventually Mars, there's a good podcast from our friend in Orlando called "Are We There Yet?" Answer no. But
Answer is no.
but it's still an interesting show. We're not there yet.
Universe Today by Fraser Terrain.
Yeah,
Universe Today, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
sure. Yeah, we could probably have a longer list.
Yeah.